First of all, we just want to start out by saying thank you for taking the time to join us here on Social with the Side of Justice. We are very excited for you to be here today.
Thank you for having me.
If it's okay with you, we just wanted to start by reminding our listeners what our mission is here on Social with the Side of Justice.
Mhm.
Our main theme this year is the lack of diverse representation in literature, film, education, and government.
Our goal for this podcast is to bring awareness to this issue and also highlight those individuals who are fighting to bring more representation into their respected fields.
So today we are lucky enough to be sitting down with equity specialist Marceline DuBose. And again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
During this process, we have really enjoyed researching you. You really do it all. An equity specialist, a teacher, a policy administrator, and a yoga teacher.
This is true.
If you don't mind, we really want to start from the beginning of your story.
Sounds good.
So, Miss DuBose, where did you grow up?
So actually, I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here for almost a decade, but I actually grew up in Minneapolis. Not far, maybe just like 2 city blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. So that's where I grew up. That was my corner store. That was my neighborhood. It was a kind of typical Midwest city. Pretty normal growing up. Our neighborhood was close knit, had a lot of friends, but also like a little bit, I want to say like economically pressed or disadvantaged. But I grew up there with a lot of friends, lived there most of my life. And what else do I say about Minneapolis? Of course, it's cold. You all know that in New Jersey. It gets very cold in the winters, beautiful in the summers. And a lot of people around the country, if you haven't been to Minneapolis, people around the country when George Floyd was murdered, a lot of what I got like here in Atlanta and also like other places that I travel for work was we didn't even know there were that many Black folks in Minneapolis. So just wanted to kind of dispel that myth too. I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, a lot of different people, but definitely predominantly families of color in our neighborhood. And that's just a misconception that some people have about Minneapolis. They don't know that. So that's a little bit about where I grew up.
And about George Floyd, how would you say that impacted you?
Oh, it was devastating. It was devastating because, first of all, the 9-minute video, like it's traumatizing to even see it, right?
Yeah.
It was not surprising. That's the other thing is that it was not surprising. Our city actually has a history of police violence. I saw a lot of police violence growing up. I've seen a police officer chase a man into my apartment building and beat him up in the hallway. So that wasn't surprising, but it was just devastating. Just the just kind of like the brutal nature of it. Like a man is literally just laying there asking for his mother and saying he can't breathe, In terms of what happened to our city after that, that was also devastating. Our whole neighborhood went up in flames. Blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks went up in flames. And there's just a lot of trauma around that. And then what made it even harder is we had 2 more police killings like shortly after. So the trauma was just, the city is still recovering, still recovering to this day. There's still burnt out shells of buildings that you can see all over the place, and a struggle between the community and the police still to this day. So these kind of things, the murder of George Floyd, of course, woke up the world, and a lot of people responded all over the world. But at the end of the day, there's still a neighborhood that has to heal from it. And of course, I feel terrible for his family and for him. So it was rough. Yeah, it was rough, still is rough. I have siblings and friends who are like literally end up in counseling from post-traumatic stress from the protests. And we also had actually during the protests a young woman who died when a man drove his truck right into the protesters and she was run over by a truck. So there's just all kinds of things that happened around it that were hard and still are hard.
Right. I remember seeing it all over social media. It was really, I don't know, it was really hard to watch.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
also seeing like other people's reactions to it and like almost them like defending the police officer was, I think I was a bit naive of like how much these people will go to defend these police officers, even if it means like putting others down and, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah. We have a blog piece on our website. Let me give you the exact name of it here. But I wrote it right after because so as you know, I'm equity specialist. I work with schools and I work with educators on all kinds of equity, anti-racism, justice-based education. And a couple years before this happened with George Floyd, there was another man named Philando Castile who was also murdered by police. But the thing with Philando Castile is he actually worked in the school district and he was murdered, I think, like 2 or 3 days before I had to go into that school district to work with the teachers. And that was very raw because they had just lost a colleague, students had just lost, and he was a beloved adult in the building. And so students and families had just lost a beloved adult. And so, anyways, after George Floyd, I wrote a blog piece called "Schools Are Also Complicit in Police Violence. We Must Do Better." And it really gets at the idea that every police officer has had a multitude of educators in their lives. And so, how are we preparing our students who will one day be judges, police officers, surgeons, whatever, for the type of professionalism, heart-led professionalism that we want in our society? So I don't know if you attach resources to your blogs, but I can send you the link for that later if people listen and they want to take a look at that, or resources to your podcast.
Do you mind if we share your blog here at SOSJ?
Oh, sure. Go ahead and share it. We try to make our blog pieces very useful and action oriented and not just theoretical or emotional, although those pieces are important too. So please do.
Okay. So, Ms. DuBose, how would you describe your family and your upbringing?
I had my family enjoyed social time with each other. We loved to hang out with each other. Every weekend, we would have aunts, uncles. We grew up in an apartment building. And so also you become family with all the other people who live in the apartment building and their kids and their family. So I would describe my family as fun. I would describe my family as very diverse. We come from a lot of different ethnicities and backgrounds and races. We were not wealthy, not middle class. In fact, we were actually on public assistance. So we didn't have a lot of the extra things. We didn't go on trips, or we didn't have like, I didn't get to play sports or those kind of things that cost extra money. But we had just like a ton of fun in our neighborhood. We would run around and hang out and make up these just like elaborate play scenarios. And related to that, in the play scenarios, I was always the teacher. Like I wanted to be a teacher. So I'm like yelling at all my little cousins and sisters and brothers and apartment building friends, like, sit down, we have to play school, so the adults were always present, but they weren't like in our mix, like how it is now sometimes for parenting. Like we just kind of ran around, did what we wanted. But they were there for us when we needed them for sure. Um, and I would say we're supportive, loving, um, and just think of like a party all the time. That's what my family was like growing up.
Oh, me too. Except I, okay, my family is also supportive. I have like my immediate family is just like me, my brother, my mom, and
Mhm.
I don't know. I usually just hung out with my neighbors, like my neighbors' kids, like a lot, and it was really fun. I miss that.
Yeah, definitely.
So, did you ever struggle with your identity growing up?
I did. Um, so as I mentioned, I come from a very diverse family. My family is a mixture primarily of like white, black, and Asian family members. Um, but and I am multiracial myself, and so I have like different sides to my family. But that being said, I did struggle with my identity growing up because people would put me in different categories. They wouldn't know which category to put me into. Um, I identified primarily as like as a light skinned Black woman. But some people would put me as Latina or just different categories. Also, like my family was one of the only, my mom and a couple of my siblings were some of the only white people in our area, in our in our um in our apartment building. So there was just there was just a lot of like trying to figure out where I fit, basically. I had aunts and a grandmother who are Black, and I had that side of my family and that side of my upbringing. And then I had, we were just very diverse. So it took me a while to settle in. I started calling myself somewhere in my probably 20s or 30s. Not that I feel this way, but other people receive me this way. So I don't feel this way, but other people receive me this way. I call it racially ambiguous. And I get a lot of like, well, what are you? So it took me a while to be able to like articulate who I am and what my roots are and what matters to me and what my like cultural capital is. Those kind of things took me probably into my 20s or 30s, probably until I had my children. Well, I had my first child at 17, but as I was raising them, um, it took me it took me a while to settle, for sure.
I know how that feels because both my parents, well, I'm not like half something else. Like both my parents are Mexican,
Mhm.
and well, they're obviously like browner skinned than like other people. So like growing up, I always looked online and I always saw like these like white actors, white like famous people, and it was just like odd because I never saw like anyone that's like me, like more
Mhm.
darker or more like whatever. But, but I think now, because of I think now I've come more accepting of who I am and not wanting to compare myself to like white people or just like other people in general. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
how would you describe high school growing up?
Ooh, high school. And I see the second half of your question, which is part of how I would describe it. I did go to a very diverse high school, right? It was the high school that served my community. Um, and I would describe it as a pretty traditional high school. We had 7 classes and we had, to take all the subjects, and we had packed hallways, and um I wasn't super social in high school. I was actually very introverted in high school. As mentioned, I had like my little social bubble that was like my family and people I considered family and in my apartment building. And so I didn't have like a high need for reaching out. So I was kind of that person in high school who would like walk down the hallways by themselves, like carrying their books, looking down. So I can only report that other people seem to be having fun in high school. Not that I wasn't having fun, but other people seem to be enjoying all of the traditional offerings of high school, whether that be homecoming or sports or whatever. But I did have some really great high school teachers that really impacted me to this day. As mentioned, I had my son my senior year of high school, so that kind of changed a lot of my experience at the end with traditional things like prom and graduation and those kind of things. Yeah, most of my closest friends were still like based from my home life, not my school building life. So it was pretty traditional setup, high school.
Did you have support like when you were pregnant throughout high school? Like, did people like kind of look down on you, or was it like more of like a common thing in your high school growing up? Did you have that support system?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say you all are getting me to open up more. Usually I stay on like some theories and some frameworks or whatever. So you're gonna find out things maybe a lot of people don't know. So I didn't tell anyone. And I was able to hide it for a long time. And I don't think I told my family until I was about 6 months pregnant. So they were shocked and not happy about that. At the time so also related to high school, I was all the way through school. I was always um, a student who loved school. And I talk about this with teachers a lot because schools tend to replicate based on who they work well for. So for me, they worked well for me. I like to read, I like to study. I was very compliant. I, had curly hair and a smile for everybody, right? So school worked really well for me. Um, and I bring that up in a lot of my trainings because there's a writer by the name of Dr. Anthony Muhammad, and he talks about what he calls the 13-year apprenticeship. And he says teachers are the only profession that spend 13 of their most formative years inside of their profession, right? So like when they're 6 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, 13 years old, they're inside of their profession. So like a surgeon doesn't spend all of their formative years on the side of a surgery table learning how to do surgery. And what happens for a lot of educators, I'm getting to your question in a second. What happens for a lot of educators is many educators, they spend 13 years in school and then they go to college. A lot of them know they want to be a teacher. And this is true for my story as well. So they spend 4 years in college. They may or may not get a master's. So they may spend 2 more years or not. Then they end up in the classroom and they teach. And if you encounter, let's say, a 45-year-old teacher who's been in the classroom most of their career, that means they've spent 40 of their 45 years in a school, right? And so that makes it very difficult to change schools because they replicate themselves over and over and over. For the people who it worked for tend to go back into it. There are some, but not a lot of people hate school and say, I want to go spend the rest of my life in that classroom teaching, right? So there's like a replication process that makes it very difficult to change what's happening in schools. So I'm getting to the point. So at this point, when I was pregnant, I was actually a very good student. I had good relationships with my teachers because I was super compliant and friendly and smiley or whatever. And I was set to go to Berkeley. I was accepted to Berkeley. I was supposed to go to Berkeley. This was a big deal for me and my family, given like kind of our environment and what the things we had to overcome. So when I pop up pregnant and I'm already accepted to Berkeley, this is not like happy news, okay, to the family. and the fact that I didn't tell them until I was 6 months pregnant. So even when my son was born early, so I had him at 8 months. Even when I was telling people like, oh, I'm getting ready to go to the hospital to have a baby, there was so much shock around me. Like, wait, what? You're having a baby? We didn't even know you were pregnant. So that was a long answer with actually, some important ideas about how schools operate in the middle. To say that I maybe would have had support, I didn't seem to seek it out at that time. So
What do you think the benefits were to going to a diverse school?
I'm imagining, because I never have gone to a non-diverse school, right? So I'm imagining that it's easier to be yourself when there's a variety of people around. So even though I described myself as kind of like walking down the hallway, looking at my books and stuff, I didn't feel ostracized. I was just an introvert, so I feel like potentially the more diverse a school is, the more you're able to be yourself, whatever that is. In my case, it might have been introverted and pregnant. In someone else's case, it might be, an artist or, fascinated with outer space or whatever, different things that you're into, different parts of your culture, your personality. I feel like it's probably easier to be yourself there. I also feel like you get a better preparation for the world, probably because the world is diverse. And so I think it's probably a better preparation for the world. And then like you get the benefit now as an adult. I have friends who are of all kinds of different cultures, and I just think it makes life more fun as well.
Yeah, here at our school, we're also pretty diverse, if we can tell from like right
Mhm.
here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have like variety of like Hispanic people, white people, black people, Asian people. Like, I think it's pretty cool that you get to learn about multiple cultures at school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're just gonna take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to be diving deeper into Miss DuBose's journey to becoming an equity specialist.
Welcome back. So, Mr. Bose, what do you think drove you to want to become a teacher?
Um, So I also come from a family of educators. My grandmother, a family of Black educators specifically. My grandmother was a sixth grade teacher in Minneapolis. And then I have two aunts who were special education teachers in Minneapolis. Um, and I don't know the moment when I decided to become a teacher. What I can tell you is I don't remember ever not wanting to be a teacher. So my first memories as a child are around 5 or 6 years old, and I already wanted to be a teacher then. So I don't know when. But never changed my mind about it. Never, that's what I wanted to do. I pursued it all the way through. I told you I made everyone play school with me. Um, but also I talk about this sometimes in the fact that in my family, there was not like a distinction or a separation between education and justice, right? Like those things had to go together. And you didn't like do justice after you did education. Like your course wouldn't be an elective course, or it wouldn't be something that you would look at when you had time or the money. Like it all needed to go together because uh, one of the purposes, there's many purposes for our education, but one of them is to continue to advance justice. At least that's how I grew up. So that's what made me want to be a teacher. I wanted to make the world more just place. And I felt like a classroom was a great place to do that.
That's so important. And I feel like it's really great that you had other educators in your family because I'm going to college for either early education or special needs education. So
Mhm.
but I feel like I don't have that sort of background of educators to help guide me. I feel like I'm
Mhm.
kind of just shooting into the dark. So I feel like it's great that you had that.
Yeah.
And did you feel like even though you had all these like powerful women in your family and these educators, Did you feel like anyone underestimated you on your journey to becoming a teacher?
No, I didn't feel like that actually. I felt like my friends and family believed in me for sure. I felt like educators along the way believed in me. And and I'm very conscious of the fact that everyone doesn't get that experience.
And who out of
And I'm also conscious of the fact of the ways that I show up that are appreciated by school, and therefore I get reinforced to say, "Oh, you can do anything. Marceline's so great; she can do it." Um, that's problematic. That certain students get that type of encouragement, and other students do not if they don't fit the mold of what the school or the classroom educators are looking for. They get a very different message, and they start getting that message young. Um, and there are some students who may decide, even by there's research that shows some students decide by as early as second or third grade that I'm not good at school, right? Because of the messages that they're getting back. So I didn't experience that, but kind of like other forms of privilege, because that was a privilege for me that I fit in with what teachers enjoyed in a student. I walked with a lot of privilege through school because of that. So when you have a certain different types of privilege, whatever privilege you have, it's really important to be able to be aware of that and like map it out. Like, how does this work? Why is it working this way? And then work to dismantle that or expand privilege, using your privilege to expand privilege. So like that's what I do. I understand schools well. I understand teachers well. I understand curriculum and instruction. Like this is the water I've been swimming in. And then I use that to try to expand what's happening, what's available for all students. So, but shorter answer is no. I felt very supported and encouraged in school, and in family, and in my neighborhood. So
And do you think like the your biggest supporter, or like the larger part of that privilege came from your family or from educators specifically?
I would say it was pretty equal. It was pretty equal. Um, it's 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 weird to talk about, but it's important to talk about that educators were really sweet to me, and because I was going into the field that they were going into, they were even more sweet to me, and I appreciate all that sweetness. It just upsets me that all students don't have it. So I would say I had a lot of really like loving, supportive educators, and I am thankful for that. And all students deserve that level of support and love, even if even if the school um, is struggling to connect with that student or that family. Like that's our job. That's what we get paid to show up and do, is to connect with all students and families, not just the ones that we like.
Mhm. And since you say that you had that support in school when you were pregnant in high school, but you didn't seek it out specifically, how do you feel like you managed it on your own, being a mom and a student?
Um, well, so I come from a very practical family, right? I told you we grew up on public assistance. One thing I'll say is that just because a family is on public assistance doesn't mean that they're not working hard. So I came from a very hard working family. My mom often worked from 8 a.m. to like midnight, two jobs, right? But her pay was so low that we were also still on public assistance, right? So my family is very practical. So when I did say I was, pregnant and having this baby or whatever, no one was like coddling me like, oh, how are you going to do this? Because we're all out here working our butts off, right? So they're like, well, sounds like, you're going to have your hands full, because there's not this like uh privilege to just say, oh, this happened and I just have to like fall into my chair and I don't know what I'm going to do. So I went to school, I worked, and I raised a child. And that really wasn't that much different than my mom, who worked and raised a child, right? Like we all have 24 hours a day. And in my practical family, I was expected to use those hours to take care of now my child and work and, pursue my responsibilities. So it was pretty like flick right into it. Like you better do your job. You decided you wanted to become a mother young, so go be a mom and also work and take care of your family and go to school. It wasn't much I don't think we stopped. I don't think the bus stopped or took a pause or anything. We just kept it rolling.
Right. And do you feel like there's enough representation of persons of color in the field of education?
There's not. And that's actually one of the big pieces that I work on as well. I think you mentioned in the intro, I've been both a state and federal level administrator, but one of my jobs as a state administrator was to manage a large grant called Teachers of Color Grant. It was used to help encourage and support expanding educators of color. And through that, I had to do quite a bit of research about what's going on, why we do or don't have enough educators of color, and some interesting things came out. One of which is there's studies that show educators of color. So I think you're going to school to become an educator, right?
Yeah.
They often, when they get into schools as an educator, they face the exact same discriminations that they faced as a student. Right. So like my son, he's 30 now. The one I had in high school, he's 30 now. He's also a school teacher. He's a Black man with ADHD. He faced a lot of struggles and discrimination in school. He didn't have all the love and the kisses and the gold stars that I got in school. He got treated very differently. And when he went back into the classroom as a teacher, he found that he was treated that exact same way by the building administrator and by his colleagues. And so school felt really actually not good to him to be in. He's actually out of the classroom now. He was an art teacher, so now he does independent art work. But he ended up leaving for exactly the same reason that he struggled when he was 12 years old and 13 years old and 14 years old. So the average length of time that teachers of color stay in the classroom is about a year and a half, and they leave. And a lot of times they leave because they're reporting the same types of pressures and discrimination, both like subtle and overt discrimination that they faced as students. So no, I don't think we have enough teachers of color. I also don't think we do a good job of keeping our teachers of color and supporting our teachers of color when they do stay or when they do come to the classroom. And I think that that's tremendously detrimental to our students. I mentioned I grew up with a grandmother and an aunt who were educators, but a lot of our students, sometimes when I do sessions, I'll ask this question: when did you have your first Black male teacher? And I'll tell you about 50 to 60% of the time, people say not until college. I don't know, for all of you, can you raise your hand? Have any of you had a Black male teacher yet?
This year.
Yeah.
This year?
Yeah.
Okay.
My junior year. Yeah.
So that matters though, right? That
Yes.
our students need to be surrounded by adults who also can reflect a variety of different lifestyles, background or interests, background, knowledge, etc., and can find themselves in their teachers and connect with them. So no, I don't think we have enough educators of color, and I don't think we do a good job of keeping educators of color when they do decide to join the profession.
Yeah, we also kind of see that here at Long Branch. Although we are a very diverse school, we see it in the teaching staff that there are a lot more like white teachers than there are like people of color like teaching us, which like I don't know, like don't you guys like kind of see it like how?
I
Yeah.
agree.
Mhm.
Although I do think that throughout these years, we've seen
Mhm.
more,
Yeah,
especially
definitely.
especially with our Italian teacher who is Korean, right? Like,
I believe so. Yeah.
yeah. So like I feel like nowadays the diversity is like opening up more and we see more people of any race coming to teach.
Yeah, but definitely through like elementary school and like I want to say
Oh,
most
yeah.
middle school, most of my teachers were all white
Same.
Mhm.
and usually female too. White
Yeah,
female.
84% of the teaching staff are white and female.
And speaking
So
about
that
your
leaves just a
son,
little bit, a small percentage of educators are men or educators of color. 84% are white and female, right? So there's definite overrepresentation of white female teachers in the teaching profession.
and having that bad experience in high school and going back into college, like connects back to what you were talking about in the beginning of that cycle and not being broken when they return to teaching.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, what do you think we can do to change that like disproportionate amount of like Black educators or educators of color and male as well?
Hmm. There's a number of things that we can do and that I have done with some of my districts that I work with. One is that it's very difficult to be like isolated. So building community and camaraderie is really important. So like when I first started teaching, there was actually it was very familiar to me. There was an older Black woman teacher who, as soon as I came in, she kind of grabbed me and said, "Hey, if you have, and your first year of teaching is really hard, no matter what, right?" So she grabbed me and she said, "Hey, if you need anything, come to me." She was like, "I'm here for you. I'll help you out," and it was familiar to me because my grandmother was also a teacher and she was about my grandmother's age at the time. So it's really important to build in systems of support like that, though, to not let it just happen stance like it did for me, but to build in systems of support where educators can support and connect with each other if they would like to. The other thing is that Malcolm Gladwell writes a book called Tipping Point, and he talks about the point at which um, cultural norms shift in an organization or in a community or in a school or whatever. And he says that point is when the population is made up of between 15 and 20% of that new norm or new culture or whatever. So basically what we found is that teachers of color stay longer in schools where there's at least 15 to 20% other teachers of color. Like there can't just be 2 out of 100 in the whole building, right? So there needs to be enough of people where you hit that tipping point where the environment shifts and then people feel safer, they feel more comfortable. So sometimes when I work with schools, I will actually school districts will try, because they want to diversify their teaching staff, they'll spread their teachers of color out across all the buildings, right? And have them being alone in the building. And I'll say, you want people to go wherever they want to go and wherever their discipline allows them to go, but you don't actively spread people away from each other. Like, it's okay for community to build, et cetera. So that helps as well. Um, and then there's just probably a lot of like cultural shifts that need to happen in terms of how educators are treated. A lot of the same like microaggressions that happen throughout society happen in schools. So like just at a school I was working with where there was one Black woman, paraprofessional in this case, and she was getting in trouble for coming late. And schools are very clock time oriented; they go by the minute. So by late, I mean she was like a couple minutes late, 2-3 minutes late each day, and she kept getting in trouble for it. And she was telling the administration that she's not the only one who comes late. She's just the only one who gets noticed when she walks through the door, right? And so the administration is reporting that to me. I said, well, let's take a look. Let's see who's coming late. And sure enough, she was right. There were plenty of other white educators who were coming 2 or 3 minutes late, but they focused on her. So there's a lot of cultural shifts that have to happen too, that I work with schools on as well. And last thing I'll say is that it's more effective for educators of color to have some experience or history or connection with the community that they're working in, the schools that they're working in. So some of my schools, so I work with schools all over the country. So I might work with schools in Vermont or Minnesota or Montana, and they're very non-diverse places, right? And those schools will say, well, we'll go to Atlanta, where I live, go to the HBCUs and recruit a teacher and then bring them to Montana. And then wonder why that person doesn't want to stay, right? So it's really also important to work within your community for people who already have experience and familiarity with your community and love it there and want to stay and educate the next generation rather than just doing kind of like a numbers quota type thing. Well, we'll go to California and get a teacher from there, or go to Texas and get a teacher from there. So that's another thing that really helps is alignment.
And apart from the inequities that you've seen in educators in schools, as a high school teacher, what are some of the inequities that you've noticed amongst the students?
I find in high schools, this is both as a high school educator and now also as a equity specialist that goes into schools. There is a certain group of students who are usually like loved and beloved by the school. And those students can get away with all kinds of things, like walking the hallway without a pass, having a busy weekend and getting extra extension on their homework. Like they can get away with all kinds of things. And then I noticed there's a whole group of middle students who are just kind of nobody's paying, like they're not being paid attention to. And then there's a group of students who get labeled as trouble or need to be watched or need some mentoring or this idea that they don't have support at home or whatever. And there's a lot of inequity between those groups of students in terms of their high school experience. I also see a lot of financial inequity. I have this statement at Due East that says, if it happens at school, it's provided by school. And this doesn't happen in most schools, but it should. It should be a goal. If it happens at school, it's provided by school. So there shouldn't be fees for extracurriculars. There shouldn't be fees for field trips. There shouldn't be fees for instruments, right? Because certain families can make that happen and other families can't. So I see a lot of that type of inequity. I also see inequity in the curriculum, who sees themselves reflected, who is excited by the curriculum, who's engaged by the pedagogy. Like there's inequities in all of that as well. Lots of discipline inequities, kind of, who's noticed for misbehavior and then what are the consequences when they are noticed for misbehavior? How big are their consequences? And there's data, almost every school that I go into, there's data that shows that Black and Brown students are noticed more often if they are misbehaving. There's a biased perception of their behavior, and then they're given harsher consequences as well. So many entrenched inequities in high schools.
And how do you, as an equity specialist, address these inequities?
We do a lot of things. So we develop a lot of frameworks that help people assess if there are inequities there. We develop self-reflection tools as well. Where is it? I just had it. So like we wrote this book for classroom educators. It's titled No Stone Unturned, a journal for anti-racist equitable pedagogy. But in there, we give all kinds of self-assessments, ways to assess your curriculum, ways to assess your discipline policies and practices. We do audits, we do equity audits, we do training. We release our blogs. Many of our blogs are written about these things. We do podcasts. The one I sent you guys yesterday was all about curriculum and how to look at curriculum. So we try to help in any way that we can. But we try to offer actual solutions, not just admiring the problem, not just spinning and self-reflection, but then action steps as well.
Thank you so much. We're just going to take a quick break, but stay tuned.
Welcome back. First, can you explain what an equity specialist is? Again.
Yeah, so we try to do a combination of our own research and framework development and also staying current in research frameworks and best practices for creating justice and equity in schools. So the first part of it is just being knowledgeable, right? And then using that knowledge to support others who also want to grow in that way. So we take our knowledge that we either develop ourselves or stay, connected with from other people, and we bring it to schools. We come in and we may do professional development for your teachers. Sometimes we'll have groups of 100, sometimes we'll have groups of 1,000. We may come in and do audits, like looking at what's going on, where are there issues, and with all of our audits, we always add recommendations for changes to give a pathway forward. We may come in and help with like visioning and planning. But the most important part of being an equity specialist is having something to bring to the table to help others out. So it's probably similar to if, you go to a doctor to get some advice about, or a nutritionist. Let me use a nutritionist as an example. You go to a nutritionist, hopefully they know a lot about your cells and how they process nutrients and what you need. And you go to them and they help you map out your nutrition and they help you stay on board. We're something similar to that, but it's related to equity and education.
And as you were saying, your years in education, would you say that helped with the process of becoming an equity specialist?
Yes. For me, it's really important that I was a classroom educator. For many of the people I talk to, that seems to matter as well, that I was a classroom educator before I came in to serve as a support or a consultant for classroom teaching. So I think it was important for my own understanding, my own development, my own love for schools and teachers and students. And then it seems to help me build connections and credibility in my work.
And as the founder of Due East, can you explain what the organization's purpose is?
The name or the organization?
The purpose you serve.
The purpose we serve. Okay. I would say our primary purpose is to support educators so that they can to support educators in creating equity and justice in their classrooms so that they can take great care of our students. Like I feel like our primary partnership is with educators, but our focus and our goal is always on students. And we just want to be of a help. If you look at our webpage, we have like tons and tons of free resources. Also, whenever I come, there's lots of free resources I will share that aren't even on the webpage. We just want to be a help for a problem that's been entrenched for a long, long time. We just want to serve schools and serve students and serve educators because we love them and we care about it.
So Due East was founded to help students and educators, but what would you say your favorite part of it is? Like your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part of the job is the creation part. So on the backside, there's front stage work and there's backstage work. So I would consider what we're doing today front stage work, right? Like I'm working together with you. But in order for me to do that, there's a lot of creation that has to happen in the backside, like development of tools, development of self-reflections, development of PowerPoints and messaging and activities, and all of that has to be developed. And as I mentioned earlier, I am an introvert and I consider myself a creative, but that is my creative bucket is like developing these things and I love it. It's a lot of fun.
When you go to these schools, what are some things that you look at to determine if a school is equitable or not?
Um, so students will almost always tell you right away what the issues are. Like it's so funny. Sometimes I'll get called in to do an equity audit and I'll say, yeah, we'll do the audit, but A, I have a feeling you already know what I'm gonna find. And B, if not, I'm pretty sure your students will tell you in about 2 minutes. But if you want me to do the audit, we'll do the audit. So students will tell you a lot. Looking at data will tell you a lot. Looking at graduation data or matriculation or test score or discipline data. Peeking at the curriculum will tell you a lot. But one of the most interesting things is actually like when you first walk in the door. What's going on in the space when you first walk in the door? Because that's the greeting that tells you like where you're coming into. And I'm not sure how your school is, but a number of schools, when you first walk in the door, you see a whole bunch of pictures of people who used to go there.
Yes,
Maybe they were on teams. Yes.
yes, we
Maybe they
from
were.
like so long ago, which I think they all definitely graduated. And
Right. Some of them probably graduated around the time I graduated well, I didn't graduate in the 70s. I was born in the 70s, but, you know, or you'll see like a wall of like all the superintendents that the district has ever had. Well, when you walk in and you see that, most schools I walk into, even schools that are very, very diverse right now, it screams like this is a space of whiteness. Because, like, maybe there's 20 superintendents and one is a woman and one is a person of color and the rest are white men, or there's all these team pictures or trophies or whatever. So that can be telling too. Just like, what is the greeting when you walk right in? What is it saying to you about this space?
yeah, and now that like you pointed it out, I'm kind of like thinking like all of the schools I've been to, like elementary, middle school, and high school, they all have that like entrance when you walk in. And I like, do you guys like your elementary schools have that? Like, they have that too?
Yeah.
When you like walked in on the walls, they were right
And
there.
the glass frame.
Oh yeah.
Glass with like some trophies and then like the picture of everyone.
Yeah. So that doesn't say, like to me, the school should be kind of like the space of the students who are there right now. And then, when you guys leave, maybe you don't demand that there be a big poster of your faces for the next 40 years and like let the next set of students have the space for themselves too. So that's just like a little like initial when I walk into a building, I can kind of pick up on some of that.
When you see that like a school is like unequitable, like, and like you like point out and like you notice that, how like quickly would you say you see like the school like actually change and like try to make change to make it more equitable?
Um, I would say that the fact that I'm there, first of all, means they're already kind of thinking about it, or maybe they're already doing stuff a lot of times. So if I'm there, it's already on their radar usually because I'm invited in by the school. And then I would say because it's already on their radar, the school is pretty open to what I call like kind of surface level things. So those come about pretty quickly, right? The surface level things come about pretty quickly. But like deep, real change is a much, much, much slower process. And I think I've seen schools where it takes a solid almost decade to really like shift. And a lot of those shifts actually come when the people change more than, so it's less about the people who are there right now deciding to change, make like deep changes. So I'm not talking about the surface changes, but like deep changes. Usually the people who are existing struggle to make the deep changes, and the deep changes don't happen until you start to get new students, new families, new educators. As it becomes more dynamic, more diverse, then those changes start to happen. But before that, it's more on the exterior. So like even your course, which is unique, it's powerful, it's important, but it's still outside of the main content, right? It will probably take a long time in your school before, for example, every curricular decision was run through a justice lens. Every book, every math. That's the type of change I'm talking about. And that type of change takes a long time. But some of the smaller changes, even your course is a little bit deeper of a change, but sometimes there'll be like a social justice billboard wall that students can put stuff on. That's a small change. Those kind of things happen fast.
Throughout your career, you have accomplished so much. What would you say is your proudest accomplishment?
All right. So this is gonna sound funny, but I was doing a session one time, and there was a table of teachers in the back of the room, and the session was kind of over, and they called me over to the table, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And they said, and I never forget this, and it feels like an accomplishment to me because it's kind of my one of my like goals personally in my work. They said, thank you for your session, da, da, da. And then they said, we feel like we could just have a sleepover with you and talk about this all night, right? And they said, we just think it would be fun if we had food and hung out together and talked about it all night. And why I call that like, I feel like a big accomplishment is because that is like the type of like connection and partnership and energy I want to create in my work. So I want people to feel excited about this work and feel connected and trust me, and I trust them, and we exchange and we do the work through that energy. And so even though that's not like a concrete accomplishment, it was feedback that I'm making connections in the way that I want to. So that's my answer to your question.
Who would you say that inspired you to become like the person you are today?
Probably a combination of my mother. She's very passionate, and loving and justice oriented. And my children, who are like, I have two. I have the 30-year-old and I have a 21-year-old. They're both artists, and they're full of sparkly creativity, wonder, hard work, adaptability. Both of them struggled in school, by the way. And so that's another reason why schools frustrate me, that we don't see the fullness of our students. But they don't see limitations. Like they take an artist's mind to everything. And they're like, well, maybe if we twist it this way and look at it from this angle, it will be different. So I would say my mother and my two children.
As we get ready to wrap up, what's like advice you would have for us? Like anything, just like advice.
I'll give you the advice I actually gave my own children, which is like follow your gifts and your passion. Society is going to give you a lot of should do's, right ways, this step after this step, treadmill type of offerings. And there is a place, a brilliant, beautiful, successful place for each of you inside of your passions. And so don't back burner those. don't wait until you're, 30 to realize, oh, I've always wanted to be this. And I spent the last 12 years doing something.
Because I feel like when you're like actually like passionate about something, it's so much more like enjoyable to do, and like you like actually want to see those changes when you're like passionate about it, like truly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, Mrs. DuBose, we just want to thank you again for dining with us here at Social with a Side of Justice. Our time with you today has been amazing, and our conversation has been so important. We hope you enjoyed your time with us.
Thank you. I had a great time. And thank you for your questions. Like I said, you got me to places most people don't. So there we go.